And we are live.
Good evening, planet Earth.
Let me check. My microphone is on this time. Good.
I am also on.
Excellent. So welcome to Viral Transmissions, Episode 2. With us, we've got Dr. Rob Tarswell up in the top left corner, Torrin Atkinson in the bottom left corner. I'm Joe Foljam, and above me in the top right is Dr. Nienke van Houten, who is a virologist and has a whole bunch of awesome stuff that I should have had written down, but don't in front of me. Hi and welcome. Thanks, Nienke. Thanks for coming.
Welcome, Joe.
Rob, did you want to take lead on this right now?
So lots of interesting things to talk about tonight, so we'll just dive right in with Dr. Van Houten. So just to start, why don't you explain to our audience, what is a virologist?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own educational background. So I don't consider myself a complete virologist. I have some training in virology. So my PhD, my research background is in vaccine design.
Somebody says they don't hear any sound.
They don't hear any sound.
Is that a thing, Joe? I'll just check. Anyone else?
Torrin, can you?
Hear
Katie can hear it. So.
Okay. Gollum can hear it. So it must be
so
Katie Marshall.
There is
okay, it's just.
That's probably you.
Okay, so it's not an us thing. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Just wanted to make sure we didn't have to do everything.
No worries. So yeah, I consider myself
an incomplete virologist.
An incomplete virologist. I consider myself.
What parts are you missing?
Well, I consider myself more of a complete vaccine designer. So it's kind of like a jack of all trades of molecular microbiologists. So I know a little bit of virology, a little bit of immunology, a little bit of protein engineering, a little bit of molecular biology. These are all interconnected fields. And so my background is in developing antiviral vaccines, specifically ones that generate antibodies. And I've also done some work in a virology lab where we generated vaccines and then tested them in animal infection models. So I've done some work with live reovirus, which doesn't really have a lot of human implications, and also influenza.
Now, if you mix bodies and antibodies, is there an explosion?
We might get into that.
By antibodies, you mean bullets, right?
That's right.
You're out. Atkinson, you're out.
I've just got started.
What are coronaviruses?
Okay,
what is a virus? Because I was reading something today that said a virus is not a living thing. Is that true?
Viruses are not considered living things. So they have a lot of features of living things. They are comprised of biological molecules, and they need to infect host cells to survive and replicate. Coronaviruses specifically, Joe, maybe if you could bring up that figure that I showed you. Okay. So with that particular figure, you'll see that there's a few things that figure has. So there's most viruses have a genome. So that's going to contain all of their genetic material, all of the information that they need to make new copies of themselves. That's usually in the middle of the virus. In the case of coronaviruses, that is a RNA genome. And then that's surrounded by what is called a nucleocapsid. These are essentially proteins that the virus makes. And this particular nucleocapsid kind of aligns itself along the genome, kind of like chainmail. So it has this, it self-assembles around the genome. And then around that, there's an envelope. And the envelope is essentially, it's called a lipid envelope. It's basically made out of fats. So you basically have a greasy coating around that genome, and then that's stabilized with some other proteins.
And that's why soap breaks it down so well, because it has that fat that's holding it together, that grease.
Exactly. So the soap will interact with that lipid envelope. It will dissociate that. It'll take that envelope apart, and the virus will basically fall apart.
Cool. This
Washing the
model
dishes.
makes me want to roll it around and start collecting things on
Na,
plugs.
na, 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 na.
Katamari?
Yeah,
Yes.
Viral Katamari. Okay.
except it's picking up bodies. That's all it picks up. Just death toll.
So if we kind of move from general viruses to coronaviruses, what can you tell us about those?
So coronaviruses belong to a family called Coronaviridae. So like other biological things or life forms, there's classification systems that viruses have. And it belongs to a subfamily of Coronavirinae. And the SARS-CoV-2 belongs to beta. It's under a classification called beta viruses under Coronavirinae. Now, all of these viruses, they share some common features. They are enveloped. They have non-segmented RNA genomes. They are round. And so viruses are often categorized by their shape. And they have a conserved genome organization. So if you look at various coronaviruses, they're all going to have similar ways that the information is laid out on their genomes. Now, one of the characteristics of coronaviruses that makes them stand out is this corona. So the word corona, it's kind of like the corona of the sun, right? You can see this glow around the sun. That's the corona of the sun. With coronaviruses, that corona is seen on electron microscopes, and it is formed by that spike protein that you see sticking out of the surface of the virus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, corona comes from it means crown from Latin.
Yeah.
So the density of the spike proteins in the coronavirus is actually much higher than we see in this illustration. Based on the electron micrographs I've seen, it looks like it's just a wall of these things.
Yeah, it could be. I haven't looked at a good EM picture in a while, so you're probably right.
So if we wanted to attack this thing with a vaccine, how do vaccines work first, and how would we target coronavirus with a vaccine?
So if I were to think about making a vaccine against coronavirus, I would think about some of the features of the virus itself and consider what aspects of the virus we could attack with the vaccine, if you will. And so this is coming back to that corona. If you look at the virus, you can see it has these spike proteins coming out of the surface. And that has been identified as a major vaccine target for that particular virus. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about vaccines, is we have to think about the structure of the actual virus and what parts we can attack with the vaccine. How vaccines work is they essentially they give our immune system a template for what that infection actually looks like without actually causing that infection. And our immune system has the capacity to develop memory. So when the immune system has seen a particular pathogen, it will form memory responses. And those memory responses can manifest in a couple of different ways. So one way is through the generation of what we call antibody molecules. And these are very specific molecules that recognize very specific shapes on the particular pathogen. So, for example, if we can make antibodies against the spike protein on the coronavirus, that would be a potential approach we could use to make a vaccine. Other aspects of the immune response that are generated could be what we call cytotoxic T cell responses. You may have heard of killer T cells before. Does that ring a bell? Or
it does.
Joe and Torin.
Caustic soda was a long time ago.
Yeah.
We probably mentioned it.
Yeah, so we call these cytotoxic T cells. The word cyto means cell, and toxic means poison. So essentially, these are T cells that can poison other cells if they are infected. So T cell will essentially go along. It'll look for signals that indicate that a particular cell is generating a whole bunch of new viruses, and then it'll kill it with a whole bunch of toxins. So those are two aspects of the immune response that are important: antibodies and cytotoxic T cells.
Okay.
And just to kind of, so the idea in the case of the coronavirus, correct me if I'm wrong, but the thought is that the spike protein is relatively conserved or highly conserved, and therefore a potentially good target because it doesn't mutate or evolve much, and therefore there might be a chance for lasting immunity from a vaccine.
So yeah, so one thing that we have to, when we're making vaccines, is think about what type of immunity does the virus produce. Ideally, we want to have infection, and this is from natural infection. For example, there are viruses and other categories of pathogens that don't produce, like malaria. They don't produce very good immunity, and so that makes modeling a vaccine much harder, because essentially a vaccine designer has to make something that's better than nature. In the case of coronavirus, it appears that the spike protein does elicit some of those antibody responses that last for, from what I've seen from so far, is at least 2 to 3 years. Haven't seen data from longer sero studies, but 2 to 3 years is a good start. And in terms of change, in terms of mutation, it seems like it's a fairly stable protein. I haven't seen comparisons of the spike protein sequence from different regions of the planet, but I suspect that it's, even if there's some subtle changes, that would be okay. It would have to be major changes that we'd have to be worried about.
So we had a question from L. Martin about the spikes, and why does it have the spikes? I think if I hide our video, us on video, you can see the video behind us, and it should show why that is. It's used to latch on to other things, right? That's how it connects to a cell or whatever it infects, right?
Yeah. So the whole function of this spike protein, and that's a really great question. Thank you. So the whole function of the spike protein is to be able to attach to its target cell via a receptor. So it is critical for the virus to be able to cause an infection, because that's how it's going to attach to a cell and then get inside of it. How it does that is actually kind of neat. It's a pretty sneaky protein, and it does some weird stuff. But if you can block that attachment of the spike protein to a target cell, maybe with an antibody molecule, then that's one way that a vaccine could prevent infection of a particular cell. So the spike protein's conserved, especially regions of it are going to be conserved, because it's so critical for the viral function.
Okay.
I expect to see the Starship Discovery traveling through this viral
Yeah.
landscape.
Rob found this video for us. It was created by, I wish I had the link so I could thank them. I'll put it up somewhere else later. Just a 3D house and design house created this and a bunch of high-res images, and they said, please go ahead and use this wherever you want. So we did.
Yeah. Now, just before we jump into what current trials are under, there's a question about, do you think there's any validity to the S strain or L strain hypothesis about the two kind of varieties of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2.
I haven't heard that hypothesis. Can you expand on it?
Haven't you heard
I
that song?
can.
You must take the L strain. No.
There was a thought that I'm afraid I don't know much about it. Perhaps our BB privateer who brought it up. And here's an article from Dr. Marshall. Coronavirus.
Yep,
that's the one I
two
just
strains and is one more deadly. I guess the short answer is we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But probably
I can't comment on it because I'm familiar with the hypothesis and I would need to read more about it.
We'll look into
but
that.
at the same time, it's not only we who don't know, it's probably just not known. Because you've been kind of grazing widely and liberally over the literature the past.
Yeah, but I've been trying to keep my focus on the vaccination literature and a little bit on the immunological protection literature. So there's probably there's a lot of information that is coming out right now, and there's a literal deluge, and there's a lot of crap. There's a lot of stuff that's being published. That's being published before peer review. There's a lot of and so filtering through that and sifting through that is definitely a challenge.
It's the Wild West.
It feels like that. Like I was looking at a meta review the other day on vaccines for SARS-CoV-2, and all of the references are like news articles or press releases from pharmaceutical companies, and this is not how I'm used to seeing science.
This is not normal science.
This is not normal science.
And bioarchive too is just on fire with new paper, preprint papers, and anything with an even remotely interesting hypothesis is on Twitter within 8 minutes and around. And 3 days later, it's sort of like, no, sorry, we were. So it is just the wildest ride.
Yeah, it's definitely not how I'm used to seeing things being published, and it means that we have to be really on our toes when taking things seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you called it pandemic publishing.
Yes.
Pandemic publishing.
Yeah.
So can you talk about some vaccine candidates? There seem to be a lot of groups all over the place announcing vaccine candidates. What is your survey revealed to you?
Yeah, so I found an article that was published fairly recently that was talking about potential vaccine candidates, and I think the number is there's approximately 34 to 35 different academic organizations, pharmaceutical organizations there that are potentially working on vaccine candidates. Pretty much all of them are in the preclinical stage. So when vaccines are designed, they go through multiple stages. There's a preclinical where you look at characteristics of the vaccine candidate in animals, and then it moves into clinical stages, which is phase 1, where you look at safety and in just a very small number of people. Then you look at and a little bit of their immune responses. And then you move to phase 2, which is a few more people. And again, you look at safety, you test dosing and stuff, and then you start rolling things out into big phase 3 trials where you can assess whether or not the vaccine is actually protecting against infection. And so if we look at where SARS-CoV-2 vaccines are right now, we have pretty much it's been around very recently, right? So everything's in the preclinical stage, and we have one vaccine that I know of that's actively been starting to go into people. So there was a news report that came out recently about a company called Moderna Therapeutics, which works in collaboration with the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and they have already tested their they've already started their phase 1 trial in which they have put their vaccine into people. I think overall the trial will have 45 people as it goes through.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of an interesting vaccine because it is a messenger RNA vaccine, and we don't actually have RNA vaccines that are clinically approved, that are approved for anything. This is a new type of vaccine technology.
Okay.
And it's been used in other I think it's been used in like cancer treatments. There's advantages to using this approach because essentially what you do is you synthesize a short piece of messenger RNA that can then get into a cell, and the cell will then translate that into the viral protein, which will then stimulate an immune response.
So it's almost like a good virus, because that's kind of what a virus does, right? Gets into you and says, make copies of me, and this instead gets into you and goes, defend yourself. Is that right?
Kind of, except it's just it would just be like the like one component. And the thing with messenger RNA vaccines is they're not what we call replication competent. So a virus can make more copies of itself.
Mm-hmm.
That one piece of messenger RNA cannot make more copies of itself.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think if we're talking about vaccines for SARS-CoV-2, our best lessons are going to be from vaccines that have been vaccine trials that have been conducted for vaccines from SARS-CoV-1, well, just SARS-CoV, original SARS, if you will, and then also MERS-CoV, which is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, because those are all somewhat related viruses. If we look at some vaccines for SARS, there have been a few phase 1 clinical trials. I've looked at a couple of them that seem promising. One used an inactivated form of the SARS virus. And then there was another one that used a DNA. It was a DNA vaccine. So kind of similar to an RNA vaccine, but in the sense that you're taking nucleic acid to transfer the information. But with a DNA vaccine, there's a couple more steps for that information to get before it gets to the protein step.
And I want to say thank you to Prophetic Octopus for that cheer. 500-bit cheer was pretty great. It's $5. I need the money right now. Thank you.
So another interesting question from the audience here. We've got how many different PCR tests are being used worldwide? Well, what's a PCR test? How many are being used worldwide? The questioner knows of at least 2. Are they comparable in sensitivity? And is there any serological testing available yet?
First of all, what is a PCR test?
So a PCR test, it basically amplifies a small region of the genome and of the virus in a test tube, and says, and if that region is amplified, it indicates that the virus is there. That's the kind of lay way to describe it. It is. I'm not familiar with the 2 different kinds of tests. although from what I understand, that the World Health Organization had suggested one kind of test, and that the CDC in the US created their own, and that created some issues in terms of their testing strategy. So that's mostly what I can comment about that. In terms of the serology the serology is really potentially very, very exciting. So what a serology test would do, so the current testing tests for active infection. It'll show you if there is actively a virus present in the nasal swabs that are being taken. What serology will do is it will look for evidence that someone has been exposed. So even if there is no active infection, you can then take somebody's blood and then see if there's any antibody responses in the blood, and then that would indicate whether or not somebody had that infection. This would be really great because it could potentially work like simple, like a pregnancy test. Maybe you just have a couple of drops of blood from your finger, you dab it on, you get a line and says yes or no, you've had SARS-CoV-2, and that could be an indication that somebody is now immune. And this is a big deal because people who
antibodies
are immune,
only form after, like, if I got the virus today, would I have antibodies today?
No, so antibodies take time to develop.
Right.
So initially with these kind of infections, some people might start to form them after 4 days, and then most people you will see them after 2 weeks.
Okay. And by that time, one assumes the virus has like run its course, and at that point they are immune.
Well, you'd have to look for active virus.
Right.
You'd have to look for that. That would be a different test.
But you're at least in the fighting the virus phase at that point. That's what that means? Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Yes. So it would be a great way to see how much of your population's exposed. You could be able to tell what herd immunity looks like. So is the virus likely to move through the population? It could be information that's useful for individuals in terms of understanding what their risk levels are. Although all of this is assuming that the level of antibodies that are shown by the test are also protective. And so that is something that we would need to understand better in terms of what this test means. Right. And so these tests have to be validated. Like China has developed a serology test. I think it's being used there. Some of the things that we don't know is with these tests, we have to see if there's also cross-reactivity that could occur because of other coronavirus infections. So there's some coronaviruses that cause colds and circulate throughout the human population. And so we'd have to know, those tests would have to tease out and be able to differentiate between those
the various coronaviruses.
Exactly. So there's a lot of validation that needs to occur for these to become into widespread use. But I'm very excited about the possibility of a serological test.
So speaking of, a slight shift from serological tests, which look for antibodies, what can you tell us about antibody therapy or plasma therapy?
So the idea there is that you take antibodies from a convalescent individual, and then transfer them to an individual who is becoming sick or is already sick, and that those antibodies in their blood would then have a protective effect on the sick individual. And this has been a technology that's been around for a long time.
First used in the Spanish flu, right?
From what I understand, yes, and I think also in diphtheria. So, like, you may have heard of the Iditarod.
The race? The dog
Yeah,
race?
the dog race.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so this is a dog race that is, I can't remember where, but like Nome, Alaska. The idea of the Iditarod, it originated because there was a diphtheria outbreak, I think in Nome, maybe in the 20s or 30s, and there was a serum, and that serum is made of antibodies that could target the diphtheria causing bacteria. And if people got it in a certain amount of time, they wouldn't die from diphtheria. So the Iditarod was this basically this race against time to move some of the serum from one location to where the infections were happening. And I think it worked.
Wow, and it's not a trivial distance. It's like a huge, long race.
Yeah, it's like it's an impressive feat.
Huh. Okay, that's interesting. Nowadays, just a dog race. Well, heroic marathonic dog race that takes days and days.
Yeah, but it was because people needed antibody therapy. That's where it started.
Wow. Okay.
Named after John Iditarod.
Now, do we have any other
Is it Torin?
Doctor? Do we have any other Dr. Nienke questions? We weren't expecting that Iditarod gem. Thanks for that.
There was a question by Dr. Katie who says, "Why is the severity of disease so different in different people?"
So I have a general answer for that. I want to say something like, genetics.
Right.
I don't know that I have a really good answer for that, but it seems like some people, what causes a lot of the very severe form of the disease is what are called these cytokine storms. So cytokines are molecules that the immune system uses to communicate within itself. And in some cases, we might start shouting, run down the street shouting fire when somebody lights a candle. And so that can sometimes happen with infections like this, is that certain cells get infected that then start to scream fire, and they recruit everything. There's a huge inflammatory response that occurs. So it might be down to various aspects of the immune response, and then there's also certain risk factors that we know also contribute to severe disease. But I think that's most of what I've uncovered. I don't know, Rob, do you have any other?
It seems like things like smoking and vaping, basically things that affect your lungs, make you more susceptible to having the more extreme reaction to COVID, right? That's what I've been hearing.
Yes. Yeah, so maybe there's setting up an inflammatory environment that could lead to these cytokine storms. But that's getting a little arm wavy.
Yeah. And I would very quickly defer to an infectious disease specialist. And with any luck, we're going to have an infectious disease specialist to talk about the clinical side of
that. Would be exciting.
The switch, the transition from SARS-CoV-2 to COVID-19, which is the clinical disease. Stay tuned, folks. We're hoping to get a colleague of mine to be able to come on the show within the next week or two.
We're rolling in all the stars of medicine.
Assuming he's not going flat out actually treating the disease in Ottawa. We'll see.
We'll just get a webcam stuck to his shoulder, and while he's working on somebody, he can talk to us.
Right.
Yeah. It's the internet. We can do anything.
Pixelate out all the faces while the...
Oh, yeah, that's right.
All the breathing tubes.
Medical privacy. Okay.
Medical privacy. Still a thing after all these years.
Oh, I know.
Ischemial asked a question for Dr. Rob, although everyone is welcome to offer suggestions. A lot of my patients are relapsing with substance use because they have nothing to do and are stuck at home. What do you suggest for people in this situation who have fallen back to destructive behavior in response to the pandemic?
Yeah, that is not an easy question. I know that late last week, the downtown east side actually, because of the sort of the shutdown of everything, there was this period where they had gotten down to between 48 and 72 hours left of street drugs, and everybody was really worried. Okay, what happens next? And at the Friday morning briefing, Dr. Henry, in coordination with the Minister of Health and federal ministers, because this touches on federal law because it involves opioids. Basically, there's been a loosening of restrictions for doctors to prescribe uh, opioids, and the push is to make sure that, so the first priority is that there's a safe opioid supply available to individuals who have substance use disorders, and there's an extensive series of guidelines that were published at around 3 o'clock Friday afternoon that are available on the BC CDC website. So that's the first place I would go looking for that resource, because the ability to prescribe, ultimately everything still requires duplicate prescriptions to backstop everything, but there's now permission for doctors to be able to kind of phone in prescription or fax in prescriptions, which is kind of new and unusual. And the pharmacies have the federal authority to release opioids to these populations. So I guess the first approach would be kind of a harm reduction approach, which would be, okay, if substance relapse is happening and there's no easy pathway to get back to things like 12-step meetings or drug and alcohol counselors, or those resources are limited while everyone's getting geared up with telemedicine, then I guess harm reduction is kind of the first. The Minister of Health published those guidelines as of Friday afternoon, so I would sort of commend you to those. And then I think there's there's probably no clear answer. One approach might be, okay, this is happening. We can accept that this is happening. It's on a finite timeline, and the goal is that this is a coping mechanism for now, and with a view to getting back into recovery once we're able to, once society starts to sort of renormalize. Oh, you're in New York City. Okay. So alcohol has been a big one, oddly enough. Some opioids for sure, but mostly drinking. Wow, that's a much harder one to control.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, here in BC, just to let you know, our liquor stores have been declared an essential service. And I think for the normal population who use alcohol in a way, that's probably fine. But as we both know, there's a significant subset of people for whom this is gasoline on a fire. And I'm really wondering about how many people are out there drinking themselves in isolation. And for that one, I wish I had an answer. I don't have a good one for you there.
Video games instead, maybe? I don't know. Like, yeah, I give them something that's addictive that fills their time that isn't going to cause liver damage. Right?
Our good friend Porn to the rescue.
Yes.
Our good friend
Pornhub is free for everybody now, thanks to COVID. So there's 15 minutes of your day.
I thought you said torrent.
No, I'm not rescuing anyone but me.
Torrent porn. Yeah. Combine the two.
I mean, I don't know if this is an option, but I know that here in Vancouver, we do have wet and dry recovery houses. And the model that our wet recovery houses is a 1 drink per hour kind of a cap. So, but I don't know if somebody at home could self-administer that.
Can you bring your own mug?
Without accountability, but they can be lawfully dispensed 1 drink per hour, literally from the time they get up till the time they go to sleep. But that probably requires somebody, the wicket and somebody in the way with access to the cabinet. And I don't know how realistic that is either for folks, who we're all shut in and homebound. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't take very long for, even if you set your own alarm on your phone to like beep every hour so you know when you're allowed. Eventually, after several days of being home and bored and nothing good going on, you're like, I'll just have a couple extra to feel better this time. And then that slope just hits and you're gone. Yeah.
Then the iceberg has calved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm glad I quit drinking. You can hear the last time I was drunk on the caustic soda alcohol episode.
Yeah.
That was,
And in fact, the one thing that and Dr. Marshall's pointing out something that is really indicative of what's going on. Alcohol sales have gone up 40% in BC. This is a problem, folks. This disease is creating all sorts of new diseases around it, and I think one of them is alcohol use disorder, or greatly exacerbating boundary cases or cases that already exist.
Curiously, my cannabis use has gone way down, but that's because I literally don't trust my supply chain. Like I don't know who's touched. Like, it's just a plant that some guy behind a counter has put on gloves to count for me, but who knows how safe that stuff is. And I'm just like, I'll be fine with these video games. It's okay.
Don't you light it on fire though, Joe?
I'm a vapor. I vape it, and so then I worry
it's supposed
about.
To get pretty hot.
It does, so it's probably safe, and maybe I'm just overthinking it. But you got to take a tea break once in a while anyway. I'm sure I'll get back on it eventually.
I'm not going to enable your weed use.
Thanks.
The other issue too is that there are a lot of good reasons not to be inhaling foreign materials into your lungs right now, because you don't want that, even if it's only mildly chronically inflamed state, to meet the virus, right? So this is a bad time to be a smoker, whether that's tobacco or cannabis. So I was out for a run today, and I saw lots of people puffing, and I was just like, my God, don't get the virus.
Keep them lungs strong.
You are.
They might have to have a fight.
So another thing that I wanted to touch on, which is kind of interesting, there was this editorial that appeared in the Washington Post, and I'll just abbreviate it, saying, I'm an emergency room doctor, and you all need to be wearing masks. And here are 34 research studies that say we all need to be wearing masks, and you should make your own mask and start wearing it. And I initially thought, wow, that's kind of cool. That's a great idea, because, masks, if you're sick, yes, a mask can help catch droplets, which is great, right? You're not going to pass the infection on. But if you're not sick, what is that mask doing? Well, if it's a cloth mask, it's probably not doing much of anything. Maybe it's not doing much harm. It's not doing much good, unless it's an uncomfortable mask and you're adjusting it and touching your face with your droplet covered fingers and actually like auto infecting yourself because that mask won't sit still. But then I thought a little more about it, and I looked at the quality of the evidence. There's a Google Doc floating around that's pretty easy to find that has these 34 studies. And one thing that was interesting I noticed was that there was one study from 2017, a Cochrane review, that actually looked at this issue of what interventions worked in the 2009 swine flu pandemic to slow rates of infection. And they looked at studies that were comparing or looking at one of three interventions: one, hand hygiene, use of masks, and cough etiquette. And cough etiquette is like cough into your elbow, not on your hand. And they found that there's good evidence for hand washing and that could be recommended. But despite scouring the literature, the evidence in favor of masks didn't rise to statistical significance. So that sort of means, okay, we see some changes resulting from masks, but the changes are so weak that we can't tell if this is just statistical fluke or is a real difference that makes a difference. And so my worry is that this has just taken off like wild across the internet. Yeah, we all need to be wearing masks. We all need to be wearing masks. The problem is, as we were pointing out in our kind of pre-show prep, just on this podcast alone, there is one person out of 4 who might actually be able to make a cloth mask. So what do you do if the whole internet is telling you you need to be wearing a mask and you don't know how to make it? Well, you don't make a mask. You just order masks. And what ends up happening is, my worry is that there are going to be all kinds of people now who are going to go into panic buying mode, saying, oh my God, the CDC has lied to us. The World Health Organization has lied to us. We should have been wearing masks all along. Spoiler alert, the evidence is actually pretty crappy that a mask is going to keep you from getting infected. And they are going to put enormous stress on already hugely stressed logistical supply chains of frontline healthcare workers getting those masks that are of medical quality or surgical quality, or N95 respiratory. It's doctors, nurses, and respiratory therapists who need these things, right? We don't need them. We need to stay home. We need to wash our hands. We need to be 2 meters apart. If we have immune compromise, then there's an indication for a mask. If we're sick and we need to leave the house for some reason, that's an indication for a mask. But this, everybody needs masks. That'd be great if there was this availability of masks. I'm not convinced it would make much of a difference. It's not something that I would choose to participate in unless everybody was doing it, and then I would do it to avoid getting the looks.
Yeah. Look at me, I'm wearing a mask, huh?
I'm not terribly convinced that the evidence rises to a bar where this can be recommended to the entire population as something we need to do. And it could be leading to significant harm because hospitals that are just barely getting enough PPE, or frankly not getting enough, are going to have an even harder time. And hospitals are becoming the hubs where COVID-19 is living and getting spread, right?
Yeah.
So if doctors and nurses can't get enough PPE, they're getting sick.
Yeah.
Hospitals are getting overrun. There aren't enough people to run the ventilators. And if you can't get a ventilator when you need a ventilator, you die. That's the natural history of this disease. So this well-intended push to get the public into masks, I think, could have a really grave downside. And I would just kind of caution people to, if you want a mask, that's great, but bloody well make your own mask or find someone who can make it. Do not add to the frenzy that led to toilet paper shortages a week and a half ago and led to huge mask shortage as well.
I still haven't found toilet paper. I basically time my showers after I take a dump now. I take a dump, flush the toilet, I go have a shower.
It's confession.
I don't need toilet paper. I'm willing to admit it. What?
Here on Viral Transmission, it's
my butt has never been this clean before. Toilet paper does do you think toilet paper does a good job of cleaning your ass? Come on. It does not.
Wow. It's confession and soapbox time.
Yeah, there we go.
So, Rob, I had a question for you about masks.
Yeah.
And maybe this connects to some of my understanding about mask use and why it's problematic for the general public. Please add your ideas as I mentioned them. So one issue that I've heard is that there's a lot of people who will wear masks improperly. So there's a lot of touching of if you're constantly adjusting it, you're touching your face a lot. That's going to increase transmission. Masks wear out, especially disposable ones, after a certain amount of time. That can also be an issue. If it gets moist, it's not going to be as effective.
Correct.
With N95 masks, they have to fit properly.
Yes.
And if that isn't the case, if you're not properly fitted, then it's not going to work in the same way.
That means no beards.
It's not doing anything.
No beard.
You've wasted an N95 mask. I saw a guy on the bus about a week, big bushy beard, N95 mask sitting on top of it. And I was just like,
not
work. What are you doing? You're literally just wasting a mask. Yeah. It was inside voice. I wanted to go outside.
And so with that rationale too, with the article, I haven't actually looked at it, is the idea that it's protecting other people from your secretions? or that you're protecting yourself from other people, because that's going to be very dependent on the kind of mask that you're wearing as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, the article, and there's multiples, and they're offering two rationales. One, it's protection of others, so it's good etiquette, respiratory etiquette. This is now a thing, respiratory etiquette, and it's
Mhm.
protection of yourself. So the evidence is really murky on both ends. There's some studies that suggest that they do nothing at all. There's some studies that suggest maybe they do a little bit of something, and so it's definitely not a slam dunk. It's
Yeah.
not clearly the case based on, say, prior epidemiological data in history that countries where there's a strong culture of mask wearing get any less influenza than any other place. It just seems to kind of go rip roaring through there, just like it goes rip roaring through everywhere else.
Right.
So on its face, the evidence for the cloth masks is kind of meh. But my worry again is, like, if we had an cloth mask for the public, hey, that'd be one thing, and we could all, and people are nervous and they're looking for ways to feel comfortable, and if your mask is a coping mechanism and you think it's helping you, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. My worry is the folks who are going, "Oh, I need a mask," and freak out and put even more stress on or eBay
On the
or
supply
home
chain.
hardware. The supply chain, basically, yeah, the supply chain is already really, really borked, and let's not bork it up even more with these kind of misfired recommendations to get everybody in masks that just take off like wildfire over Twitter, and so further distrust, right? One way to think about a mask is think about it like at the hospital, it's always raining, and so the doctors and nurses need umbrellas. When we go out, if we're carrying an umbrella, you may or may not even run into a rain. And the way to avoid rain clouds is to stay 2 meters away from them and walk around them.
But that's so hard in Vancouver, Rob.
That's hard. It's hard everywhere. And so the answer is stay in your house. It's even more effective than a face mask.
Yeah.
If you want to get out for that walk, go out at night. Go out when everybody's inside.
And we talked.
But if you have your Immortan Joe cosplay, now is the perfect time to put that on for multiple reasons.
That's right.
That's a deeper cut than I understand.
No.
It's
Mad Max reference.
Fury Road.
Okay.
The bad guy from Fury Road.
All right.
He had a...
Yeah.
Or Bane.
Or Bane. That's right.
Click.
Don't get addicted to water. That guy?
That's the guy.
That's the guy. And we talked about it a bit in our first episode as well, that in the real world, like not in a lab or not when somebody's being intubated in a hospital or something like that, that coronavirus doesn't get aerosolized. It doesn't get into particles small enough to float around in the air, that it's only in those bigger particles when somebody literally sneezes or coughs on you, and then it hits you and either gets in your hands and you touch your mucous membranes or right onto your face and does that. And as I was talking about before we started the show, that includes your eyes, right? And your mask is not covering your eyes. So if somebody coughs on you and you've got a mask here and it still hits there, you can still get coronavirus from that. So wear your fetish gear instead and completely cover up.
Joe, somebody suggested a toilet paper subscription service.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting in the chat here a link to the 5 best toilet paper subscriptions.
Oh, okay.
So you can get your fancy TP delivered to your door.
I might not go back to toilet paper. I'll be honest.
Toilet paper.
When you get this peach flavored toilet paper, maybe you'll never go back from that.
Well, so think about how much toilet paper you go through in your life and how freaking useless it is. Like,
yeah, my friend just installed a bidet, so maybe you need to get a bidet.
I think I need a bidet, or I'm just gonna. I work from home, so timing my shower with my daily relieving is totally doable for me.
You're not pooping into the washing machine, are you?
It's no, no.
Just checking.
I'm saving that for when I'm visiting you, Torin.
Thank you.
You might just want to have, the occasional guest toilet paper, though.
Yeah, that's true. Guest.
When you have savages.
When I can finally have guests again. Like,
yes,
hey, come
right
visit
now
me.
It's not very relevant.
It's not gonna happen.
It's an aspirational toilet paper. guessed toilet paper.
And John Hordick adds, I'm a wastewater plant operator. Do not flush anything but waste and toilet paper.
What about my dreams?
Well, I think a lot of people are flushing their dreams thanks to COVID-19. Yeah.
All your dreams are dead.
Just
Don't
bury
flush
them.
the dead.
Bury
Just
them.
bury
Don't-
Do we have any more important science things to talk about before we get to the penguins?
Well, I think I've kind of said my piece. Ischemial mentions my favorite PPE shortages. A fetish site recently donated all of their gear to UK
yes.
hospitals.
Yeah, that's
That is-
nice.
That is fantastic.
Well, before we get to penguins, I want to do a real quick mention, because a thing that's been bugging me is especially right-wing politicians in America have been going on about how, oh, well, this young people are generally safe from this. We don't have to worry about it too much. Let's get the economy going. Grandparents should be happy to sacrifice themselves to make so that the economy keeps going. And they completely fail to understand that even though the fatality rate for young people, even 10 to 19 years, is very low, you're dealing with potentially very large numbers of infections. So I was like, well, what is the maximum? And I know that 100% infection is not going to happen for various reasons, but it gives us a kind of a thing to look at. And so the fatality rate for COVID-19 for ages 10 to 19 is 0.18%. Which you think, oh, well, that's pretty low. That's not too bad. We don't have to worry too much about it. But there are over 40 million Americans of that age range. And if 100% of them were infected, which granted they're not, but it just gives you the idea of the maximum here, that's 75,000 deaths of teenagers in America. If only
It's
five...
the economy.
But the economy, right?
But even if it weren't teens, like that's an outrageous,
It's still terrible.
horrible thing to say. Like,
Yes.
oh, forget about grandma and grandpa.
Yeah.
They'll sacrifice themselves for the economy.
It
That's
is.
just it's unspeakable.
But if only 5% of U.S. teens get infected, 5% get infected with COVID-19, that will be an entire 9/11 of deaths of teenagers. And then they're the least. All the other numbers for all the other age groups are bigger. So way more. And then you add them all together. My total here for all the various fatality rates and percentages, if it was 100% infection, which again, even if it went rampant, I think we said 80% is maybe possible, is over 8 million deaths. This is serious business. This is not something to talk about keeping the economy going and the cost being acceptable. If even 10% of that is nearly 1 million deaths, like you can't do it.
Anthony Fauci was on TV today talking about, and somebody was asking him about COVID-19. And they were asking him for some projections. And he said, yeah, I think in America we're looking at 100,000 cases. And he said, no, wait, did I say cases? I meant deaths. We're looking at minimum 100,000 to 200,000 deaths, at least 1 million cases at this point.
Best
And if anyone's in a
case.
position to know, it's Dr. Anthony Fauci.
The specialist on this who knows not to touch his face, and then I keep seeing him standing next to Donald Trump going,
Yeah,
Face
he's not
bombing.
on the platform anymore.
Yeah.
He's been given the boot by dear leader.
Donald
Thank God he's still in his job.
Donald didn't like that the expert was contradicting what he would say.
Yeah, but he's still active behind the scenes. Hopefully, his recommendation too. He's my one thread of hope for America.
Let's hear
As
some
long
good
as
news.
Anthony-
Torrin, tell us about
Yeah.
the penguins.
So there's no people at the Vancouver Aquarium. There's no visitors at the Vancouver Aquarium anymore, and they laid off a bunch of their staff. But of course, the people who take care of the animals are still there, and they just like let the penguins be free. So they're all just walking around the aquarium, shitting on things, bobbing for jellyfish, trying on all the T-shirts in the gift shop. It's amazing thing. I don't know if there's a webcam or anything, but if you Google Vancouver Aquarium, you can watch some video that they've taken of
Katie
the
gave us
penguins
a link.
waddling around. There it is.
Can we pull that up onto our stream?
Let me see what I can do. So here's an Instagram.
'Cause
They're
today was
VIPs.
kind of
They're very important penguins.
It's a
They're the
very
only people.
small
They're the
little-
only creatures allowed to take the tours.
I think
In
my
a
favorite
similar
part-
In
Go
a
ahead.
similar vein, I'm curious to see what's going to happen when, as the bears come out of hibernation in North Van and Coquitlam.
Where's all the garbage?
Yeah. Well, they'll have a lot more space on
Yeah, that's true.
trails and streets to
Oh, yeah.
occupy.
Where are all the meat
things.
sacks?
Yeah.
No
do
scary,
this.
noisy meat sacks. Leaving their treats.
Well, we'll try to get this video up, but thanks so much for joining us, Dr.
Here we
Van Houten.
Go.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, you brought a
Uh,
lot of depth and credibility to this fledgling blogcast.
Always
Here we
happy
go.
to lend credibility, Rob.
Thank you.
Here we go. We're up in the stream. There's a little
Hey,
video of some penguins.
Watching the sea lions or something.
Can't get us here, sucker.
Like, I'm not sure what side of the glass I want to be on.
That's amazing. They're gawking through the glass the way I gawk through the glass.
Yeah. And then what do we got? We got
Titillating.
another one taking a look. Oh, I just got a chill up my spine. Don't those things eat me?
Fun times at the aquarium. That's a movie right there. Like mixing A Night at the Museum with Madagascar. Is that the one with penguins in it? Madagascar? Or no, it's Happy Feet.
Oh, here we go. Is this the one? Is this the one where they go down the stairs?
I hope so.
That's some good viewing. Watching these guys navigate stairs.
So, penguins. Good for what ails you.
They're practically chickens.
That's what I heard on a cartoon once.
And I hates to see a chicken cry so much, I has to put it out of its misery.
So we'll do this again next Sunday.
Next Sunday at 8, yeah, and we'll have hopefully another expert guest to come on. Thanks so much, Dr. Van Houten, for coming on and helping us schmoes
You're welcome.
understand this and explaining this to our 44 viewers. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
You doubled the amount of